What's up guys, so I want to talk about Resident Evil 7 and trying to determine who the main character for Resident Evil 7 is going to be. So because of the recent Resident Evil games, I'm going to assume that there's going to be at least 2 characters, so I'm going to be choosing 2 based off the information I have. And I will go through this list, and when I'm going through the list, I want to make it clear that this is speculation and that I'm only using the canon Resident Evil titles and not the animated movies either. So anyways, let's just get right into it. First, let's talk about Leon. Leon was in Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 6, and the Dark Side Chronicles. Now, because I feel like Leon came up way too often and he's going to be included in the Resident Evil 2 remake, that Capcom has no need to bring him back into Resident Evil 7. They're gonna want somebody else to bring in the fan base because he is already going to be in another game, so there's no need to bring him back into another Resident Evil game. Now, Chris has been in Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 5, Resident Evil Revelations, Resident Evil 6, and the Umbrella Chronicles. Now, just like Leon, he has come up way too often, and he was also in Resident Evil 6, so I don't see a point in him coming back for Resident Evil 7. Leon and Chris were huge selling points, at least for me anyways, for Resident Evil 6. Now that Resident Evil 6 has passed, it doesn't really make much sense to bring back Chris as well. Now let's move on to Claire. Claire was in Resident Evil 2, Code Veronica X, and Resident Evil Revelations 2. Now, I don't think she's going to be in Resident Evil 7 for 2 reasons. The first off is that Resident Evil 2 Remake, again, just like Leon, she's going to be included in that game. So there's no need to pull her back for Resident Evil 7 as well. Revelations 2, again, came out fairly recently. It was the last canon Resident Evil game, I believe. And that game was done very, very well. It was very, very successful and well received. So yeah, I don't feel like she'll return just because she's not ready to come back. She needs some time to cool off, and Capcom has more than enough characters to choose from. And that brings me again to Barry, who has been in Revelations 2, as well as Moira, who has also been in Revelations 2. There's no need to bring these characters back yet. They were just in a game, so therefore they should not come back. Now let's move on to Jill, who's been in Resident Evil 1, Revelations, Resident Evil 5 DLC, and Umbrella Chronicles. Now Resident Evil 5, I say Resident Evil 5 DLC because even though she was in the main story of Resident Evil 5, she was playable only in the DLC. Now we haven't seen her in a Resident Evil game for a while, so let's just put Jill off to the side. Now let's talk about Rebecca Chambers. She was in Resident Evil 0 as well as Resident Evil 1. Just like Jill, we have not seen her in a very long time in Resident Evil games, so let's take Chambers and put her to the side. Now let's talk about Sherry Birkin. Sherry was in Resident Evil 2 as well as Resident Evil 6. I feel because, again, she's going to be included in Resident Evil 2 Remake that there's no need to bring her back, but also she is just too closely tied to Leon and Claire. If Leon and Claire are not in a game, there is literally no point in bringing in Sherry. She is just too close to the both of them. Now, Ada Wong, who was also in Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 6, and the Dark Side Chronicles, as well as the Umbrella Chronicles, she is just too close to Leon. Every game Leon has been involved in, she has made an appearance. So, because of this, I don't think she'll be in the game as well. Next, let's talk about Jake, who was in Resident Evil 6. Jake was, again, in only Resident Evil 6. He was never included in any other Resident Evil game, so let's take him and also put him to the side. Now for the last character on this list is Sheva. Sheva was also in Resident Evil 5, and that is it. So let's take Sheva and let's put her on the side as well. So we're only left with Jill, Rebecca, Jake, and Sherry. Now, let's talk about these 4 characters and the potential they have in returning to Resident Evil 7. Now, Jill. she hasn't been in a game for a long time like most of these people, but I feel like she will be the main pull. Out of these 4 people, Jill is obvious the most popular out of all of them. She has a good fan base behind her. She was in the original Resident Evil. And just like all the people here on this list, Jill, Rebecca, Jake, and Sheva, they all have Chris in common. They all either worked with Chris or they have tensions built up with Chris. Meaning Jake, who again is Wesker's son, Chris killed Wesker. Chris also worked with Rebecca, Jill, and Sheva. So all these 4 characters do have somebody in common, which means that there's room for drama, there's room for a bunch of stuff. They can really work well together, and Jake can be this tension bringer. If Jill finds out Jake is Wesker's son, she cannot trust him. It's the same thing with Sheva, same thing with Rebecca. So it's very interesting. But since there can only be 2, I'm going on a limb and say that even though Rebecca also started in Resident Evil 1, she really worked with Chris, Jill is just more popular. Jill is a very popular character. People really do love her. She is obviously done so well in Resident Evil 3 and in Revelation. So yes, I feel like Jill as well as Sheva should be the 2 main characters. Sheva worked with Chris, and again she had tension with Jill. She had to fight with Jill in Resident Evil 5. I feel like Rebecca is not as popular, and Jake's style just doesn't fit survival horror. He's just too action oriented, and if Capcom were to strip away his action hand-to-hand fighting style, he just wouldn't be Jake. He would not be Wesker's kid. So my prediction is going to be Jill, and it's going to be Sheva. What do you guys think? I can be wrong. This is all speculation, and you're allowed to give your opinion, and I'll be reading all of the comments. So let me know who you guys think is going to be the main characters. Jill and Sheva is my prediction. What's your prediction? I'm going to be out of here. Thank you guys for listening. Deuces.